Welcome back. I think we're slanted. My production team, I tell you. So we're in chapter 18. I know I had a comment on one of the YouTube videos. This is on YouTube too, by the way. If you're watching it on Substack, thank you. We will eventually be on Facebook and all that. I've got the page ready. I just hadn't really done anything yet. But one of the comments was that I needed to comb my hair differently. Really? Okay. This isn't a photo shoot. Also, if you are the one that made that comment, how about leaving your name next time so we can have a conversation about how you think my hair should be styled? Because my production team and my makeup and wardrobe team are the same people. They're me. So this is as good as it gets. So we're in chapter 18 of Exodus. And I will be honest with you, it would be a lot more fun to stop now. And the reason is we're about to uncover some stuff that are going to make some people uncomfortable. Some people are going to drop out altogether and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like him. And the reason I know this is because I taught this a little over a year and a half ago. And one of the ladies in the class got really, really upset with me because she didn't like some of the things that God said. And my response was, I'm not saying it. God is saying it. Your argument is with God, just like Moshe. And it was so odd that we had just covered the Israelites blaming the messenger and not God. And she did it. And that's a long story. I won't get into it. But we're in chapter 18. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. And we're going to jump right in. This is the hillbilly chapter. It's where we talk about Jethro. Those, some of you may have gotten it, but those are dad jokes. So, chapter 18 of Exodus. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything God had done for Moses and his people, the Israelites. He heard especially how the Lord had rescued them from Egypt. Earlier, Moses had sent his wife Zipporah and his two sons back to Jethro, who had taken them in. I didn't know we could do that, but let's see. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, now came to visit Moses in the wilderness. He brought Moses' wife and two sons with him, and they arrived while Moses and the people were camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent a message to Moses saying, I, Jethro, your father-in-law, am coming to see you with your wife and your two sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. They asked about each other's welfare and then went into Moses' tent. Moses told his father-in-law everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and Egypt on behalf of Israel. He also told about all the hardships they had experienced along the way and how the Lord had rescued his people from all their troubles. Jethro was delighted when he heard about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel as he rescued them from the hand of the Egyptians. Praise the Lord, Jethro said. This is one of those translation things too. And we'll get into that. But for he has rescued you from the Egyptians and Pharaoh. Yes, he has rescued Israel from the powerful hand of Egypt. I know now that the Lord is greater than all other gods, because he rescued his people from the oppression of the proud Egyptians. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. Aaron and all the elders of Israel came out and joined him in a sacrificial meal in God's presence. And I just want to stop here for a second. Making sacrifices to God was fairly normal. That was something almost everybody did. That's kind of how you appeased the God of wherever you were. So, excuse me. If we look at verse 12 in the complete Jewish Bible, it says, Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the leaders of Israel to share the meal before God and with Moses' father-in-law. The verse before verse 11. Now I know that Adonai is greater than all other gods because he rescued those who were treated so arrogantly. And the problem is when we just say Lord, most of us think of Jesus. We don't think of God. And so some of that has been done intentionally, and then some of it is just poor translation. And you're probably thinking, well, why does that matter? Why is he always griping about that? I promise it will become more important as we progress. That's why I keep hammering on it. So the next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all of this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening?" Moses replied, "Because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When disputes arise, they come to me. I am the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform people of God's decrees and give them his instructions." "That is not good," Moses' father-in-law exclaimed. "You're going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. Now listen to me and let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him. Teach them God's decrees and give them his instructions. Show them how to conduct their lives. But select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes." If you're on an elder board, that should apply to you. "Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 150, and 10. They should always be available to solve people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace." Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed his suggestion. That doesn't always happen. He chose capable men from all over Israel and appointed them as leaders over the people. He put them in charge of groups of 1,000, 150, and 10. These men were always available to solve the people's common disputes. They brought the major cases to Moses, but they took the smaller matters themselves. Soon after this, Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, who returned to his own land. So this is a fairly short chapter, but the original language shows Jethro knew God's name. Knowing a God's name was important back then too, because that's how you got that God to do what you wanted. That was the belief. I'm not saying it's true. It just was a belief. It was true to them. There are people that think the world's flat. There are people who think that, everything's a conspiracy. Well, if it's true to them, that's what we're talking about. And that's how we have to look at it. So one of Jethro's purposes was to bring Moses back his wife and his 2 sons. Because if you remember, she caused such a problem about the whole circumcision thing that he sent her home. And basically Jethro said, no. You took a wife, you get her back, and your sons. Don't send them home to me to raise. So verse 5 says that Moses was at the mountain of God. It was close to Midian, and there apparently had been some correspondence between Moses and Jethro, because he had been sending messages that he was coming. And this is also probably where he took him years earlier with the burning bush. So Jethro has the stories concerning the Hebrew God confirmed. Everything he had heard, Moses said, yeah, that's all true. He really did do all that huge stuff in Israel or in Egypt and brought us out. And in verse 11, he confesses that Jehovah is greater than all other gods. Remember, they all thought there were multiple gods. They were territorial gods, the God of this, the God of that. They believed this was a God, and they thought it was a strong God, but they didn't quite realize it was the only God. And before we beat up on the Egyptians or the Israelites, for that matter, is a lot of us feel that way. We didn't realize it early on, the full power. I still don't realize the full power of God, but I'm learning it as I go. We are progressing to understanding how big God really is. So that's why he made the sacrifice. This was also probably the way of making a covenant for them. I mean, it was a standard way of making a covenant, but that's probably how they did it, was make a sacrifice and have a meal. So did he renounce his other gods? Probably not. He simply acknowledged that Jehovah was the El, the chief God. So it was good that the people were learning to seek Jehovah, but it was bad that they all felt they could only approach Jehovah through Moses. God must have agreed with Jethro because Moses instituted it. And that's what's so neat about God. Neat's probably not a good word to use, but incredible about God. He used a non-Israelite to develop the establishment, really, of Israel's justice system. he took his advice. God used somebody that Moses would listen to on a practical level, and he instituted it, a non-Hebrew. So verse 21 says the judges would come from among all the people. So these would be just ordinary citizens. There weren't Levites yet. So, and Jethro, he was a Midianite. So he was part of a tribe that a few years later, God's going to order be destroyed. So it's not like he elevated him in the sense that he changed anything about him. He just used him. God can use anybody. It does not matter who it is. Sometimes as Christians, we think, well, he's not even a Christian. God doesn't need him to be a Christian to use him. He might want him to be, but he doesn't need him to be. So verse 21 said, the judiciary system is secular. It is just regular people. That's all it is. These are not priests or Levites yet. So even before Israel received the law, they were well organized. Instructions and commands could be shared pretty rapidly. When you got that many people, you need a communication system. Otherwise, how are those people in the back going to get it? If you've ever taken a trip with like 50 people, that's a lot. 1,000 people is an enormous amount of people. We're talking millions, somewhere between 3 and 4 million people. So that way they could handle the everyday disputes and that kind of stuff. And that is a good God principle, is Jehovah is a God of order, not chaos. That craziness is not where God's at. He's about order. So God was showing that his laws and structures could be trusted. I find that really comforting, even though the modern day church has said, hey, the law doesn't matter. That law is not there so if you break it, you get busted and hammered down. That law is there to teach you how to live. Just like when your mom made you go to bed on time, it wasn't because she was mean and horrible. It was because you needed more sleep. So the rule or the law seemed horrible, but it was there for your benefit. It wasn't really, it was probably partially there for hers too. I know I sent my kids to bed early, but let's see. It was made clear that as long as Moses is alive, he is the final authority on all matters. This is one of the reasons I keep saying Moses was so elevated, because on earth, he was the final say in all matters. So early in Exodus, we're told that when Moses speaks, it's as if God speaks. This is why Moses is held in such high honor, because God basically elevated him to be God. He is his agent, his Meshach, what we consider Jesus to be the ultimate fulfiller of that agent on earth, fully God, fully man. This is Moses as a shadow of that. He wasn't God. He wasn't Jesus. He had been elevated to almost divine status. So when we see Jesus elevated to that, we will see the connection. We'll understand what's happening. The problem is we don't really read the Old Testament, so we didn't see any of that stuff, or at least I didn't for the first 50 years. So that's chapter 18. Again, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the next couple of chapters are going to be rough. And I just ask that you stick with me, pray, ask God to show you what's true and not true. And if you disagree with me, please come to me. But number one, don't go beat up another Christian. Don't go beat up your pastor. Don't go get online and say all these bad things about your church or anything like that. Let's study it together. That's the goal, for us to understand what God's word says, not what somebody else says. And we'll do that together if you just let me help you. And I'm learning too. Believe me, I'm going through this just like you are. So remember, love God, love people, and change the world.